Again, thank you for having me. I know it's late in the day there. It's late morning my time in the East Coast here in the U.S. I appreciate the invite to come share my thoughts on this particular topic that's very near and dear to me. I don't know if there are investors and or companies that are associated with the game industry. I have a lot of experience in that, so I wanted to share my thoughts, not just about the game industry, because it might not be topical for you, but there's a lot of, I think, value in studying what the game industry is doing and what they're adopting, because it tends to be a predictor of technologies that are coming into the market, especially if they stick with it. By the way, are there any folks that are associated with the game industry in the audience? I'll go ahead and proceed. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure the bandwidth is okay on my end.
Yes, we can perfectly hear you and see the presentation.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So just a bit about my background. So I spent a couple of decades in the video game industry. I had the great fortune to start one of the first mobile game studios in the US when the devices were very small, and when the first pieces of code were being allowed to be downloaded over the air on these very small color screens, back when Nokias and Motorola's and things like that were all the rage. From then, of course, the smartphones took hold of the whole industry, and now what you see today is just millions of these apps that are on app stores that you can download. And that particular wave, by the way, created a massive amount of new developers in the industry, because anybody could put together an app or a game and publish it on the store, where before it was really hard to do that. So I was very intrigued with that industry, and I did that for several decades, and again, had the opportunity to work with some folks like Trip Hawkins, who founded Electronic Arts, and then also worked very closely with Ilkka Paananen, who went on to create Supercell with his co-founder. But it was really interesting to see the technologies that were adopted very quickly. I spent a few years in cybersecurity and saw, I thought, a really great insight into how corporate technologies like VPNs became consumer technologies that many companies now grew up around, which is the ability for you to secure and anonymize your activity on the internet. Now was something that you could just download, hit a button, and you were secured, where before it was something that was a little esoteric and not a lot of people understood what was a personal VPN. So that was really interesting. After that, I founded my own incubator for about 3 years, and saw and funded a number of applications and services, mostly around gaming, but anything that had to do with social utility. There was a lot of things like translation apps, gaming, travel, things like that. So that was really neat to see a lot of the entrepreneurial ideas that were coming out. Now, currently, I'm working on a platform called Cloudzilla, which will be very pertinent to this particular presentation, not because it's a gaming platform, but because it actually, I think, is going to emerge because of what we talk about today, which is the demand for platforms that better serve all these new entrants of developers that are coming into the market, including the folks in the game sector. I spoke about this before, but I love the gaming industry only because, like I said before, there's a high risk-reward profile that exists in the game sector, especially for startups. Any kind of new technology that comes along, they will gladly embrace it and see if it can work in their particular game to make it a better game. And they have a very, very high tolerance for failure as well, meaning that if it doesn't work, they just quickly move on. So there's not a lot of either embarrassment or negative impact to folks that are trying those technologies in those companies. So it's actually a very great place to see what comes out of the sector as a predictor to what other industries might adopt. I've seen very recently in the last year and a half, an explosion of new developers into the game sector, especially when I was running my incubator. And there's always a talented pool of folks that are interested in designing a game and then joining forces with somebody who could code a game and somebody who could make art assets for the game and putting it all together and making a game. There's no shortage of that. There's always great people that have those kinds of ideas and entrepreneurial drive. But what's different in the last year and a half, I would say, is the advent of the AI coding tools and the advent of the LLMs, which makes everything so simple now. It lowers the bar for someone who previously couldn't find somebody to help code their game or make the art for their game to actually try to do it themselves now. And they can do it in such a way that is astounding, quite honestly, right? If you look at the production qualities of some of these things that are being put out, in many ways, it's leapfrogged what we could conventionally do with the future growth that we saw happening with those tool chains. It's completely leapfrogged all that. So it's a pretty exciting time. The last point I'll put on this before I continue to my other slides is I've seen many tech waves come and go through the game industry, but also just the investment community and things like that. And a lot of times there's hype about, say, the token economy that the blockchain brought, or NFTs, which was going to change quite a bit of things. We saw that come and go, and I would sort of say that if you really stepped back from it and observed it from a third-party point of view, you would see that it was a little bit of a force fit, right? And almost every entrepreneurial company or founder that I met with that had a great idea around how to use an NFT or the token economy, it felt like it was just a little bit forced and was a little bit of a bolt-on to the main idea that might have been a game mechanic or a game concept. But I find that the latest technology wave that has to do with AI is very different. I've been now working with entrepreneurs over the last year and a half that have adopted it and are still using it. In fact, using it more and more in their entire workflow. So I find it to be very different than the technology waves that were just prior to this that came and went. These are sort of effortlessly fitting into their way of life and how they build their software and how they're able to be more productive, but also I would say more creative. And I know there's some controversy around how AI might be an issue where it's eliminating certain roles in the game industry and other industries, but the way I've seen it is that it helps the folks that are in those roles do a lot better productive jobs and also increase the creativity of the organization as a whole. I've actually witnessed this firsthand. Now, this is anecdotal, but in the few conversations I've had with other organizations that are large public organizations, that seems to be the case as well, is they're able to speed up certain creative activities that would take weeks or months. They're able to do it in days now. So it really helps the whole production. As most technologies, you'll see things start from a 50,000-foot level, and then some companies will come along and make tool chains out of those, or SDKs, or platforms that you can plug into. That's no different than happened with AI here in the last year and a half. There's a number of companies, including the platform that we're building, Cloudzilla, that allows us to leverage AI and also help folks that are using AI to get their software out to their customers in a much more efficient way. As it pertains to the game industry, I talked about those two big words, efficiency and productivity. Those are just the baseline things that I see happen overnight. So prior technologies, we would scratch our heads trying to figure out where it should fit. I've seen a couple big differences. One is that the small teams, and generally entrepreneurs have small teams, right? It's generally them and a partner, or them and a consultant, contractor, developer, whatever it might be. They're able to do things that I saw as recently as 2 or 3 years ago would take them 5, 6 months to get to a first playable that looks like something you could play and interact with on the screen. It could take them now just days or weeks. And the production values are so remarkably higher than what you would see in the last couple of years that, again, I think we've completely leapfrogged what we've seen before in technology. And again, I'm setting aside the controversies that some of these AI tools have with IP ingestion, right? And how they deal with that. That has to be sorted out. That's a legitimate discussion and has to be ironed out. But just as a tool, and just speaking to the tool, and I think it's incredible what entrepreneurs that have a small team size to do console level quality. The other thing I will say that it's redefining pipelines and workflows. So even at the bigger companies, like I mentioned before, if you're just ideating a concept, before we would sit in a room with producers, designers, creatives, and we'd talk about concepts, and we would the artist would storyboard those out, and we would meet again in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and we'd discuss it and iterate again on the idea and storyboard those out. Even if you did the storyboards digitally, you couldn't create the level of productivity that happens in that particular activity that I just described like you can now in real time without those AI tools. And we have done this now in real time, and we do this in real time with AI tools. And it really helps move that particular piece of the project and the production along, because we could do things in real time. And I for one, believe that will be the way things will be done in the future. There's no doubt that companies are digitizing this so that it's in a format that the AI can ingest, so that if you have an idea of putting several characters together to form a new production from different IPs, you could do it in real time and come up with that concept visualization very, very quickly, where before, again, it would be a lot of manual work. The biggest thing that I've seen happening is this level of entrepreneur coders coming into the space. And if you're sitting in the audience and you're an investor and or if you're a startup, you probably witnessed this as well, right? So there's always been a healthy amount of entrepreneurs that team up with coders, but not at the level I've seen in the last 12 to 18 months. And it's directly because of these AI tools that help people get their app out there or get these production values out there very quickly. I'm getting a low bandwidth marker on there. Let me know if you want me. I can pause my video if that helps.
We can hear you, but no see you in the last part. Thank you.
Okay, I will. Yeah, I will keep going. The other thing I will say is, unlike some prior technology waves, so my last point on that slide was that I'm very confident that the technology with the AI tools and these platforms will only continue to mature and get better. And if there's any test to the fact that they're already and using it, they're not going to let it go. It's going to become part of the actual tools that they use on a day-to-day basis. If you look, just it multiplies to all platforms. There's already several million apps that are on the App Store. That doesn't happen because there are big companies releasing apps. It's because entrepreneurs are coming into the space, and folks like Supercell are able to, with a team of 2 and then 3, then 4, create games that explode into billion-dollar companies. I actually think that wave is happening again. There are a wave of new entrepreneurs that are taking advantage of these AI tools that are letting them do things they couldn't do before very easily. I also am making a fine point that not only will they make more apps, and there'll be a flood of apps, but the apps will be better than before. And that's not always the case, right? So when you saw these prior technologies like NFTs and things like that, there'd be a wave of apps that took advantage of those, but they weren't great. But I do see now with these tools that there's a higher bar being reached with the level of, I would say, production values that are coming out from these tools. They're just amazing what you can see just this very small entrepreneurial thing do. And I think that actually opens up the investment sideline where before you might have to invest a certain way, and possibly it takes 3 to 4 years to get to profitability, and then 5, 6 years to get to an acquisition. I think this is very different now because you that part of these entrepreneurs being able to make an app that has extremely high production values very quickly. With these tools, you're able to do this in very short periods of times. Sometimes just in months to a year, you can get to something that's actually driving revenue and creating a lot of value. So I think there'll be new ways that VCs come into the market to look at companies like this because of what these tools are enabling. And I also think that we're going to have to look at the billing models and the monetization strategies. So currently, there's a very mature way that people pay for their software, whether it's subscription or in-app purchases or soft currency, or just flat out shrink wrap licenses. But I think now with the AI tools that are an ongoing service that are plugged into their games or their apps, there's going to have to be some different monetization strategies that get developed, and that will only help rise the entire, I think, the economy of those coders that are building apps like that. The last point I'll make, and this is very relevant to me, is that because there's so many new coders entering the market that have the ability now to make professional-looking applications and services, I think they will probably encounter their first time on putting their software on a cloud, and they will find that they are living in an archaic world of having to pick one location on one cloud for a certain price and manually have to manage the scale up. And they'll figure out that they're not really coding their apps anymore. They're becoming a DevOps or NetOps person. And I think that will spawn the need for clouds to become different and act differently, because there's this new wave of developers that will demand something different, which is, I'm making a lot of these apps. I just want to very simply click to a geography, which is what we do in Cloudzilla. You just point to the Americas or Europe or wherever it is, and that particular application that you just built will go live in many clouds in many locations and scale up and down without you having to worry about it, and in a cost-efficient manner that's always closest to where your customers are. And that I believe is a lot of value for these new entrepreneurial coders that are coming into the market that are about to be pleasantly, or I should say unpleasantly surprised by what it means to put software and manage software into a cloud. By the way, here's some stuff that's specific to the game industry, and for those of you that are excited to learn about the game industry, There are several mechanics, game mechanics we call them, and or genres we call them, that were fairly tedious to implement. One of them was the role-playing game, or we call RPG. Storytelling was very difficult and tedious to get the AI right. Murder mysteries, what we call non-player characters, NPCs, which are the characters that accompany you to guide you along the gameplay path. These were very hard to do in a way that made it interesting and immersive and human-like, and certainly even more harder if you wanted to have the player replay the exact same game, but not have it be the same dialogue and the same tone of voice and the same personality all the time. So what these new LLMs have been able to do is completely change all that, which is to say I can now very quickly train a number of NPCs using AI, give them names, personalities, dynamic personalities, relationship biases, character flaws, background information, private information between one NPC and another, shared information between all the NPCs. There were things I can do now that historically was very difficult to do, and I would need a specialist on my team to do that. Now it's just a form that you fill out in real time on a platform that builds that character for you, and now that character is ready to go and put in your game, full with the 3D model and all the 3D animations and all the AI personality, voice, by the way, you could train the voice as well. The background, all those things dialed in, that takes, it could just take minutes now to set that up, where it could have taken weeks or months. And you can tune those NPCs on your platform, and you can make the 12 variables of that personality. You can vary those depending on what you want the character to do in your game. You couldn't do that before. So because it solved a lot of that pain, there's no doubt that there are going to be new companies that come into the space and become successful very, very quickly, because they now have the ability to execute on a concept that they might have had, but they didn't have the budget or the time to do it before. Now you can have just one entrepreneur that comes into the space and says, here's a 28-page game design document, and I can literally implement it very quickly with the advent of these new tools. We've never seen anything like that before. I think that's a really important point. I talked about the development cycles. I think the investors in the investment community are going to see a different class of entrepreneur grow up in this next generation because of those dev cycles. And I mentioned this before, but it could take anywhere between a year or 2 years to make a game. If it's a console game, it might take 5 years. In a lot of cases, it takes millions of dollars to do that. And now it takes just some college kid in their room to have an idea to literally plug into one of these AI backends, create this enormous open world with a bunch of pieces, and have that game ship on an app store or on Steam on PC. And they can do that with a very low budget. And the production qualities are extremely high, remarkably high. So I'm in particular very excited about that. I've seen firsthand the entrepreneurs that are flowing through my network that have ideas and are able to not just share the idea, but share a first playable, because they're using these tools now, and that's never happened before. So there's definitely a sea change that's occurring. I'm coming to the last couple sets of client ideas here. So I do firmly believe that the folks that I've worked with that are small entrepreneurs, they build out indie teams of a developer, an artist, a couple programmers, they will naturally come to a point where they have to put it into the cloud. And a lot of these entrepreneurs will ship 3 or 4 games and work on the ones that get adopted and grow, and then let the other ones kind of die on the vine. Interesting stat here, 99.9% of, I think it's actually 99.1% of AWS customers are what they call tiny spenders or startups, which essentially just, they spend less than $1,000 a month, and on average, a couple 120 people. So the vast majority of the developers on these clouds are already small startups. Well, guess what? There's a whole new wave of millions of more entrepreneurial coders coming into the market. That wave is coming very soon, and it will necessitate the need for, I believe, platforms like the one I'm building, which is allowing them to not worry about anything with the cloud. Is just to simply put your software up there and it just roams wherever your customers are, and you don't get a sticker shock with the price. It tells you exactly how much it's going to be. Is the bandwidth okay? I apologize. It's usually my end with the bandwidth.
No, there is not a problem. We understood that it's a big push forward now in the game industry. So there are some people here in the room who are surely interested about. Maybe you want to address a question.
Oh, fabulous. Sure. I just had this fine slide. Do you want to switch to Q&A? I can certainly do that.
So my question is, with the fast development of technology, for example, now phones have almost the power of a console, a small console,
Right.
not a good one.
Right.
Where's the future? Will be mobile, will be console, or PC, or cross-platform?
Yeah, I think certainly cross-platform seems to be the way we live our lives, right? So we're very centrally connected to our phones, so I think that can't go away. But there are certain activities, especially gaming, I think, where if it's a more lean-in type focused game, and certainly by appointment where we play multiplayer, let's say, it's not asynchronous. We'll have to have things like PCs and laptops be the main platform. But I agree with you. I think it's cross-platform, and there's no way we're going back to a non-connected mobile lifestyle, right? Everybody's going to have mobile. So I think a lot of these AI technologies are already planning for that. So if you look at most of the platforms that are being built for developers, they've already have SDKs that serve the mobile part of it. In a lot of cases, by the way, at least in my incubator, there is a big push to test it on mobile first, just because it's easier to get to that market to test the adoption. If it's not something that is a large piece of software or utility or something like that. If it's certainly entertainment, you can certainly test it on mobile to see if it works. But yeah, I think that's a great question.
And what I heard from mobile, it's much more easier to advertise it and get monetized. So you can put it for free.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. So it's extremely easy to publish it to a marketplace that has, billions of prospective users and downloaders, and then to your point, it's much easier to solve the discovery problem, which is I could get more people to find an app on the App Store more quickly and more efficiently than, let's say, I could get them to find a website more efficiently. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
He's setting up gaming platforms. That's why he asked.
That's great. I would love to talk to you.
So we have
I would love to talk to you.
Okay. Anybody else? No. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
If some more details needed on questions, we'll keep your address and keep contacting you in the future.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Take care.